attention, please. Please take your seats. Get the program started. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bill Plunkett. I'm a longtime CBC trustee. I wanted to start by welcoming our newest trustees who are here today. Would ask them to stand, please, and call their names so we know who they are. Andy Campbell from Morgan Stanley. Larry Graham from Brookfield Properties. Tracy Rich from Guardian Life. And Thomas Brodsky from the Brodsky Organization. We're extremely fortunate this morning to have two new deputy mayors with us, one of whom is physically present at the moment, and the other one, Howard Wolfson, will be here as soon as he drops his daughter off. Steve Goldsmith, our deputy mayor for operations, and Howard are going to engage in a Charlie Rose-like conversation with the CBC president, Carol Kellerman. We're going to try this format. We wanted to engage people, we encourage questions, and we thank you for participating. Steve Goldsmith is an old friend and associate at McKenna Long with me before he took this job, and I will say this, Mayor Bloomberg is extremely fortunate to have both of these new deputy mayors in his administration, and they are fortunate to have the opportunity to work with the mayor and to work with each other. Steve Goldsmith is widely regarded as one of the country's most innovative thinkers when it comes to cutting-edge solutions to public policy and social problems. Steve's done it all. As a hands-on and very successful mayor of Indianapolis, to the directorship of the acclaimed Innovation in American Government program at Harvard's Kennedy School. Steve's been an entrepreneur in the private sector, which is where we met, and he served both President Bush and President Obama as chair of the Corporation for National and Community Service. He brings to New York an open mind, skilled in listening, and coming up with creative ideas. As I said, Steve and I were colleagues at McKenna Long, and I think the McKenna Long people who are here today will testify to the fact that when you reach out to Steve on any kind of a difficult policy question, it was astonishing the breadth of his knowledge and the understanding of the very difficult issues that sometimes arise. And I can tell you, on a personal basis, this is a wonderful guy who will do great things for New York. And I'd like to please extend the CBC welcome to Steve Goldsmith. Now, I'm also going to introduce Howard, even if he's not here, because we don't want to break up the continuity of the program. Many of you know Howard as the counselor to the mayor, who joined the mayor's staff in January and has become deputy mayor for government affairs and communications. Howard's a local, having grown up in Yonkers, graduated from the University of Chicago, and has a master's in U.S. history from Duke University. He served a number of posts in government and politics, including as press secretary and chief of staff to Congresswoman Nita Lowey, and director of the first successful Senate campaigns of Chuck Schumer in 1998 and Hillary Clinton in 2000. Howard's been the executive director of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and a senior strategist and communications director for Senator Clinton's presidential campaign in 2008. After 2008, he returned to his consulting firm, the Global Park Group, and became a commentator on Fox News. Still trying to figure out how that happened. He and Glenn Beck. He was a senior strategist in Mayor Bloomberg's re-election campaign before joining the administration. Howard's wife, Terry McCullough, is chief of staff to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So when Howard gets here, we'll put him right on the panel and we'll continue. Carol, why don't we get started here? There's plenty of questions to Steve Goldsmith. He can stay here all day. But we'll try to get Howard here soon as we can. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. It is true, Howard called me and said that he had a last minute child privilege and has to take his daughter to kindergarten. The east side traffic doesn't spill over to the west side. He'll be here soon and he'll just walk in. But as Bill said, there are plenty of things to talk to Steve about. I thought this would be kind of more interesting than people just standing up and making statements. But when I started working on it yesterday, I realized I should have asked Charlie Rose to do it instead of me. But let's start by, let me just ask you, Steve, you have only been in New York on the job for 4 months. So I know it's very early, but you were the mayor of Indianapolis, a much smaller city, for 2 terms. What are your initial impressions of the difference in city government and how the city's run?
I've learned it's bigger here. First of all, let me just say I appreciate Bill's introduction. The point at Goldsmith story is I tried to get a job at McKinnon a couple of years ago. I couldn't, so I had to go back into government and become deputy mayor. So I enjoyed working with Bill. I was at Harvard's Kennedy School and advising McKinnon along. I appreciate my relationship there with Bill. Let me just do this really quickly. I'm not going to stand up for every conversation. I was a trial lawyer once, and talking to people whose faces you can't see is very disconcerting. So let me just say hello and answer this question. I'll do the rest of it seated and do the answers relatively shortly. Let me spend a minute or two on this one. So the issues, Indianapolis is about 900,000 people, which is not 8.5 million people. The issues are not that different. The scale and complexity is hugely different. And so that's point 1. Point 2 is Indianapolis, where we did a few things on the management side that brought 4,000 or 5,000 people from around the world to look at the city. The secret to success was a lot of technology and a lot of labor management productivity changes. And New York City, in the current situation that we face, has more government than it can afford. But it's not very easy to get from where we are today to the future, right? Because the city government has, I think, particularly with Mayor Bloomberg's ability to kind of recruit people, is a lot of really creative professional people in New York City government that you wouldn't find anywhere in the world. But they sit on maybe the worst systems I've seen or taught about anywhere. And they make it very difficult to innovate and to get to productivity. And a couple of you heard me at the Cranes breakfast, so I'll just summarize this in a minute. But, it came out of Tammany Hall. It came out of Tammany Hall with the way that we produced honest government in New York City is with lots of rules. And if you take the collective bargaining contracts and you overlay a couple thousand civil service classifications, and you weave in about 500 consent decrees, you end up with a situation that's just a tangled web, and it's very difficult to get through it to the other side where you can see productivity and employee discretion. And about the only management device so in Indianapolis you can actually get people to work smarter. In New York City you really can't get them to work more productively. The only management tool that's left is the ability to lay off people. Right, which is kind of a perverse tool of progressive government, right? Because you're restricted in how you reimagine the work. So the long answer to the short question is there's a huge amount of talent and a really wonderful, vibrant city, and a really quite archaic way of delivering public services that works because it's very hierarchical. Everything works in New York City, but it works at great cost. And as the revenues can't sustain the hierarchy, then you have to change the nature of work. And that is very complicated to do inside the legal set of rules that we have.
Did you notice anything particular in having to respond to the tornado? And that's a big disaster for New York, where you were in charge. What was the contrast in terms of the way Minneapolis handles something like that and what you saw here?
I mean, I think this is a city that responds exceptionally well to these extraordinary events, right? You know, the police department, the fire department, the parks department, the work they did on the trees was really continuing to be quite remarkable. Public Works does the same thing. So you know, what I saw was a system that worked. And it worked with. I didn't really add anything to it at all. It works on its own. It's set up as professional. And I think the city government is really good at those sorts of things. I'm trying to go around city government and ask, you know, the thing that concerns me, I remember from the 9/11 Commission, is kind of the, you know, failure of imagination. So the issue is not whether the city can operate and respond well to a contemplated disaster, but whether it's contemplated all of the range of risks. So I thought what the city workers did was quite impressive, actually.
Well, you brought up the labor contracts, and as you know, that's an area of particular interest and emphasis for CBC. So I gather that contract negotiations are now part of your jurisdiction, and all the contracts with the public employee unions have expired. So how's it going? What's your approach to the discussions?
Well, there really aren't any discussions, so the approach is pretty clear. Many of the labor contracts are expiring. There's a number of issues, but you know, in front of all of those is the fact that the UFT is very large and very dominant in the Municipal Labor Council, and there is no money for increases. There is no money for increases, period. And that's a leftover contract from the last set. I would like to retain relatively good relationships with labor. I mean, I'm meeting with the local presidents. We're trying to talk about improvements in each particular local. But I don't see any active negotiations in the near future. There's very little way to do it, particularly as long as the UFT contract is on its own. Howard may have some observations about that as well.
Did you have a pattern bargaining culture in Indy?
No.
I guess you don't.
Well, I mean, you know, there's a pattern has advantages and disadvantages, right? Pattern bargaining allows you to obviously accomplish a lot. There's essentially 200 locals that are involved in city government. But we have to change the way we work here in lots of different ways. And everything is rule-driven and everything is patterned. And it makes it very difficult to do transformative changes in that environment. So we'll see what happens. I mean, basically, there's a lot of labor issues we're going through now that case by case and situation by situation and pushing on all of the current assumptions about how work is done. And as I mentioned, I really think that Howard is brilliant. Howard, you're just in time. The question is, how do you think that the UFT negotiations will affect our pattern bargaining? And welcome to you.